When we last saw Della Duck, she had spent almost 10 years completely alone, stranded on the moon. She spent a decade trying to survive, learning rocket science, and fighting giant moon mites. Then, Della found hope, new friends, a sense of motherhood, and the material she needed to rebuild the Spear of Selene and return to Earth. This is the story of how Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mother came home. One of the best things about Disney's new DuckTales series is how it's formed a habit of turning idle questions into mysteries. For decades, we've known Huey, Dewey, and Louie only as Donald Duck's nephews, with, at best, only passing references to their real parents. If you read the old comics, you just kind of assume that Donald and the kids know why they're living together and the boys aren't with their mother and father. But DuckTales kind of turns that on its head and asks a different question. What if nobody knew where Huey, Dewey, and Louie's parents were? Asking that question and changing that hole in the characters' origins into this mystery begging to be solved has been a major driving force for the show since day one. Not only does this give the viewers something to look forward to as the stories go on, it gives the characters something to pine for. And it deepens the show's overall theme of a family that goes on adventures. The whereabouts of the kid's father is still really up in the air, but their mother, Della Duck, that we know something about. In season 1, we slowly unraveled the mystery of how Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mother disappeared. At the season finale, we'd learned that she was stranded on the moon, and in the first half of season 2, we discovered what she had been doing there. Now we're finally getting answers to the biggest questions. How does Della Duck get home, and what happens when she gets there? The episodes The Golden Spear and Nothing Can Stop Della Duck are the answers to this. But before you continue to watch this video, if you haven't seen those episodes yet, stop. Don't watch this video. The stories we're talking about here have been an emotional turning point for the entire series, something everything else has been building to, and they deserve to be watched spoiler-free. In fact, they're so worthy of being seen in their own right that even that spoiler warning isn't going to put me at full liberty to talk about everything. I'll actually be skipping over a lot of the finer details in this video. I think it's important to talk about what a great job these episodes do at making a new character feel like she's been missing. Because in reality, Della is new, and the idea that she's been missing from the Duck family dynamic for a long time is something completely fabricated by the new DuckTales. And that's important to recognize, because making that believable and bringing a new character back to something she was actually never originally a part of is probably both DuckTales' biggest challenge and the show's biggest success. And selling that emotion took a lot of groundwork. It's why we followed Louie as he was investigating his mother's disappearance, why we were there as his brothers discovered that he was looking for her behind their back and them feeling betrayed, why it was such a big deal that Scrooge keeping her disappearance and the circumstances around that a secret from them was a betrayal so big it almost destroyed their family. This was the groundwork to make Della's reappearance, or her actual first appearance, work. It's also why Della's proper introduction, apart from that one time travel episode, was a full story focused just on her. The show had to make us miss someone we never met. And it worked! Now that she's back and we've been introduced to her as someone to expect to return, we are ready as viewers to root for her as she repairs the Spear of Selene. And along the way, we've become familiar with who she is in these few episodes and the legend about her. And it's really incredible to start off this episode being ready to accept someone back into our lives who was never there. It completely sells that. And it goes one step further by giving her a side B story where we can laugh along with her as she tries to make friends with someone that just doesn't want to be her friend.
Hey, we both have spears. That's neat.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Best of all, this show isn't even done endearing Della to us. Throughout this story, as she works to become friends with Penumbra and fix her ship, she's forging a relationship with the people of the moon in general, telling them stories, teaching them about the Earth trait of compassion, and endearing their friendship. It's a great follow-up to our initial Della episode, where we see her struggling in the wastelands of the moon and just trying to survive. Here she's being way more constructive. She's working to get back home. And after all that time we spent getting to know her and hearing about her as a legend, it's just incredibly satisfying to see her work toward that goal, because we know she's gonna get to it. And it's something we've been waiting for since this series basically started. Although this episode is pretty single-minded about showing us that rebuilding of the Spear of Selene, it doesn't hesitate to go back and remind us of the motivation. Della isn't just a space adventurer, she's a mother, and she's a mother who's never met her kids. The emotional weight behind this episode is huge, but that doesn't mean the episode is all about Della. In fact, she's only about 1/3 of it. Alongside Della's story, we have the moon people actually sort of figuring out their own problems. Penumbra trying to wrangle with the idea of an invader from another planet not being a threat. From her perspective, it's a completely valid concern. But you also have the kindness of Della and her superior officer cajoling her and trying to get her to think maybe this isn't right. Maybe compassion is the answer here. And watching Penumbra come around is one of the joys of this episode. I mean, she's a very interesting character. She's stubborn, she's funny, she's motivated and loyal, but she also does want friends, and she does want to connect with Della, but all of her instincts are telling her something about the situation isn't right. And she's not wrong about that, but her instincts about what's wrong about the situation are just a little off. The big twist of the episode isn't about Della getting home, which is what we expect, but about the moon people maybe not being as peaceful as they look. Penumbra might have been the only one acting like she was afraid of an Earthling, but it's a very real fear, apparently, among some of these moon people. And the story sets up a future episode or storyline where they're the antagonists, and I don't even want to imagine where that can go, but it's really exciting. Especially when you consider what happens later in this episode. And despite how much I love Della and her storyline, my favorite part of this episode isn't about her, it's about her brother. Donald Duck has never really liked this life of adventure, and it's really taking a toll on him. He's molting and losing his feathers and going bald from stress, to the extent that his doctor has prescribed him a prescription hammock. Now, first of all, that sounds relaxing and amazing, but even with a prescription hammock, it's hard for Donald Duck to relax with a family that just seems to attract the supernatural. That's why in between Della's adventures on the moon and rebuilding the spear, we see what's going on back at McDuck Manor and all these misadventures that Donald Duck keeps running into. And that includes things like fighting off zombies with a weird Evil Dead reference. He's got a chainsaw on his hand, to fighting off Storkules. Well, not fighting off Storkules, but Zeus showing up, and there's Storkules and Dewey with wings, interdimensional portals, and just so many different things. With a daily life like this, it's no surprise that Donald is at his wit's end and he's completely exhausted all the time. And although it's rough to see Donald molting and not exactly at his best, these sequences are some of my favorite parts of this episode, because we don't get to see that much of Donald in DuckTales. We never have. Seeing him as part of this family has been one of my favorite parts about this reboot, which makes his fate at this episode just a little sad. Della does successfully repair her ship and blast off of the moon, going back to Earth. And it's triumphant and cool and a little emotional to see her shrieking towards the Earth, ready to come home to her family. But her return has a consequence. it's not really her fault, but there's a consequence. Donald is so stressed that the family decides to send him off on a cruise vacation to relax. And as he's waiting for the bus, he sees something familiar land in the woods. Donald has been waiting for his sister to come home somehow for 10 years, and he goes immediately to find the Spear of Selene when he sees a crash land and find Della. But you know the saying, who gets stuck with all the bad luck? No one but Donald Duck. I have really mixed feelings about this scene, because on the one hand, the idea of Donald accidentally shooting himself off into space is just perfect and really funny. But the idea of Donald shooting himself off into space right before he thinks he's gonna get his sister back is also really sad. But as depressing as a thought that is, the real tearjerker comes next time, when Della finally comes home.